Thank you very much, Mr Acting Speaker. I'm pleased, in fact thrilled, to rise today in support of the Fair Trading Fuel Pricing Information Amendment Bill 2020, and in particular as a country MP who is, as are all country people, well used to having to pay higher fuel prices in comparison to those that are found in the city. As well as that, Mr Acting Speaker, we are seeing inexplicable price discrepancies between petrol stations located within townships, between townships, and at prices that did not seem to be about transport costs or fluctuating oil prices. Port Augusta can be cheaper than Kadina, Whyalla cheaper than Pirie, Port Wakefield dearer than Wallaroo, and prices at different petrol stations in the same town can vary widely. And that is apparent to all of us that drive through Port Wakefield on our way to town for these wonderful sitting weeks that we enjoy so much, Mr Speaker, where all three of those petrol stations along the main street there can have different prices mere metres apart. The reasoning behind such differences has long sparked kitchen, table and front bar discussion, and it is hoped that the fuel check scheme proposed in this bill before us will help to demystify overall price cycle behaviour, and that the result will be that less money from household budgets will have to go into filling up the family car. The price of fuel really matters to households and businesses, and it impacts budgets and profits and losses, particularly for regional transport operators, regional businesses who have no choice but to fill up in order to get their goods and services delivered. So the bill before us is a very welcome one indeed. Every $1 or $20 or $50 a tank will bring welcome relief for many regional consumers who have for too long been charged exorbitant prices for petrol because they lack a competitive market. Now regional customers will have access to real-time data that will enable them to shop around instead of being stuck paying higher prices compared to motorists in our city areas. People are incensed at the regular yo-yoing of pricing, $1.34 in some places, $1.72 in others, and that Adelaide motorists can enjoy 20-year lows recently, while regional people remain paying almost 50 cents a litre more at times. I understand, Mr Deputy Speaker, this happens because country retailers do not fill up their tanks as often as city stations, and many set their prices on a weekly basis, and country operators have to retain prices in line with the price of fuel at the time at which the tanks are filled up in order to make a profit. Country retailers are different to city petrol stations who change their prices more frequently. When a small town retailer orders a load of fuel, they have a price they're going to charge based off profit margins, and it stays the same until the next load. But even in country towns where there are multinational branded stations near independents, 1 minute the independent can be 10 cents more expensive and the next they can be 10 cents cheaper. The fuel check model is the chosen model the bill before us facilitates, and feedback to my office indicates this model and the intent of this bill is very welcome. This model requires petrol stations to report any price changes to a centralised database, and it is the universal view that it will help motorists make informed choices and find the cheapest prices at any given time. Every petrol station will need to report to the state government when they change the price of fuel, and this data is then made available to app providers, providing the opportunity for us to choose a local petrol station with the best price within 30 minutes of any change, which will occur within 30 minutes of any price change, and then the data is then fed into the system, be made available to all app users. It will be great to just get in the car, turn on your chosen app, because you'll know you've got the timely and accurate data that you need looking on your screen, ready to look at, and be able to see which is the closest and cheapest petrol for you, whether you're in the city or the country. For us in Narungga, we will be able to see what one town over is offering and work out if the drive to that station is worth providing a cost saving, or if we're planning a trip to Adelaide, where the best spot on the route is to fill up. Constituents do not need to question the need for such a scheme, and have mainly shown interest in how the scheme will work and its practical implementation. That a third-party data aggregator will collect the fuel price information from fuel retailers for private app developers to use free of charge. That retailers found not to comply will be fined, regulated via Business and Consumer Services, and they're also interested in enforcement and how retailers will be fined should they be found to not comply. Associated amendments to the Fair Trading Act will create a series of offences punishable by a maximum fine of $10,000 to enforce compliance, with the scheme by fuel retailers. Regional retailers advise they prefer the model chosen over others because it requires reporting only when price changes rather than every single day, which means compliance will be less of an impost on smaller businesses, which is a good thing. It is predicted that the improved transparency that comes with real-time price monitoring will lead to improved competition, which will put downward pressure on prices, helping to alleviate cost of living pressures. Fuel is an essential item for people living in country areas where there are no taxis and no public bus or train transport. Thus, this issue is a vital one for regional people. We often see price differences from town to town, a cent or two difference per litre in the main, but sometimes more, and I believe that the price check scheme will result in cost savings for constituents in my electorate. Country people well understand retailers need to maximise profits, and they are also aware and used to expect to pay more for products and services that have to incur the transport and delivery costs from metropolitan areas. But it has always been frustrating to see fuel prices leap at the peak demand times, in school holidays, public holidays, at Christmas and Easter and at harvest time. So it is hoped that the bill before us will help increase market competition, put more control back into the consumer during such peak times. In the past 12 months, fuel prices in South Australia have surged by up to $30 a tank according to the REA, with prices regularly staying high for 5 rather than 2 or 3 days compared to interstate counterparts. According to the ACCC, daily average retail prices for petrol in Adelaide are above the estimated average costs up to 2/3 of the time. The fuel check scheme proposed will certainly offer choice for consumers, and the increased transparency of fuel prices will enable us all to take advantage of the cheapest prices out there at any given time. It was important to get this bill right, and for this reason the Marshall Liberal government requested the South Australian Productivity Commission to investigate and report on potential models that will provide the best net benefit for consumers, to recommend a model that would be taken up by consumers, acted on by consumers, and provide benefits that exceed the costs of regulation to retailers and government. The Commission was charged with looking at the effectiveness of real-time pricing schemes interstate, including in New South Wales, Queensland, in the Northern Territory and Western Australia, and to find the most cost-effective solution to increase transparency in fuel prices in this state, which is characterised by a small number of retailers that collectively account for the bulk of retail outlets. Currently, retailers display their current prices at their site, and whilst there are already commercially driven smartphone apps that provide fuel prices by location which work well, they are incomplete in coverage and some data is out of date. Quoting from the Commission report, Mr Deputy Speaker, the RAA commented that some apps are more comprehensive and timelier than others, and not all of them include prices for the lowest priced retail sites. And further, and I quote, the RAA assessment is that around 70% of fuel retailers' information is available on the commercial apps in South Australia. And so now our aim as part of this initiative is to gather accurately the data from the other 30%. The RAA has called for real-time fuel price monitoring for many, many years. In its submission to the Commission inquiry, it cited a study by the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission showing massive swings, or massive savings, I should say, to motorists by increased competition. Direct access to Bowser prices at nearby stations will increase competition, the RAA argues, and further that access to real-time information on mobile phones is essential for Adelaide motorists because of the extremes of the fluctuating price cycle. So the bill today ensures that the lost 30% of information can now be captured and used to inform South Australians, for the bottom line result that consumers are better off and that markets will work better when consumers are well informed. We all stand to save money on our fuel costs because of this bill today. Of note is the ACCC estimate that the potential savings to Adelaide motorists of a price transparency could be up to $75 million a year, or up to $300 annually. Submissions to the South Australian Productivity Commission inquiry during the consultation period thoroughly examined different scheme options, whether consumers should provide the information or the retailers. It had a forensic look at price cycles in this state, at the benefits of existing models in this country and overseas, and whilst it was found that the retail price cycles may still persist over time, even with the price transparency schemes, any scheme offered to consumers is better than none at all. Key issues addressed by the Commission and raised by stakeholders included any likely impact of interventions on the information available, the amount of information available, price impacts on following the transparency schemes, competition among retailers, benefits to motorists, and potential regulatory burden on retailers. So I am reassured the research preceding the introduction of this bill was thorough, and whilst the Productivity Commission was not charged with making formal recommendation, its analysis of the various policy models greatly assisted the government in forming the legislation that is before us today. I applaud the work of the Commission and the Attorney General and her Office for the extensive work undertaken to get the best available scheme possible here in South Australia, and especially the positive decision by the Marshall Liberal government in relation to this matter is to undertake a 2-year trial to ensure the stated benefits are met. And of reassuring note is that this government has reiterated that no policy of fuel price monitoring will have its support if it is found to have increased fuel prices. Another question put to me by constituents is why is the government spending money on this when there are other apps that appear to be working well? The answer is, in our view, that they are not working as well as they could. Currently, retailers aren't compelled to provide contemporaneous fuel pricing, and coverage from the current apps is lacking. The government is legislating that retailers provide the price of their product within 30 minutes of a change, and will then provide that information to apps like those already available for more accurate fuel price watching. The difference on offer to non-regulated data gathering is that the scheme proposed will be regulated by consumer and business services to ensure that retailers are complying. It is mandatory data entering, with fuel retailers who don't comply facing a maximum penalty of $10,000 for offences such as not being registered in accordance with requirements, refusing or failing to comply with requirements, or providing false or misleading information. It is also reiterated that what is proposed is not a government app, but it is a government collecting the reliable, accurate information and passing it on to consumers who can then determine which app they use the information on. They are free to choose what they prefer to do with the data based on additional services, discounts or whatever else that may be offered by app developers. I concede that benefits at the Bowser for city motorists will be greater, just by the fact that city folk have far more choice in where they fill up close to home than people who live in regional areas. But reports show that there will be benefits and everything helps. The trial will show that what savings there will be for regional motorists, and I will be watching with great interest, as there has been mixed results in other states. In the height of the Christmas break last year, motorists were angry to see again that the price peak came just as motorists were due to fill up for the next break. An RAA poll of more than 500 motorists found that nearly 2/3 would use online real-time prices to source petrol, and that 1 in 5 would use such an app that is proposed. I hope more people use the price monitoring, as there is ample evidence that prices will be driven down when motorists have had informed freedom of choice to shop around with real-time pricing. In Queensland, the equivalent of RAAA there revealed in December last year the average monthly price of unleaded petrol was around 2.3 cents a litre cheaper in Brisbane since the introduction of their 12-month trial of a real-time price scheme. So there is exciting potential for savings and accountability by retailers driven by consumer demand and more often than plain profit. I am confident, Mr Deputy Speaker, we've got the best possible advice from the Productivity Commission on this, and now as a result we are getting on with the job to trial the scheme and ultimately relieve more cost of living pressures for South Australian consumers. Whilst the state government cannot control fuel prices, what we can do is give motorists access to accurate and timely pricing information to allow consumers to find the best possible price. That's what this bill before us facilitates, and I commend it to the House.